Hello, my name's Harry Edwards. I'm a level designer at Ubisoft Flemington. This video will look at the design process of a main mission I created for the Division 2 Warlords of New York expansion. The player is tasked with taking down James Dragov, the leader of the Rikers faction. Rikers are a dangerous group of escaped convicts from Rikers Island. They have fortified Wall Street and transformed the financial exchange into a black market, using this as their base of operations. For this mission, I wanted the player to feel like they're fighting against an organised force in their home territory. Strong defensive positions, ambush moments, and overwhelming firepower would be used to reinforce this throughout the mission. In summary, the mission would be set on Wall Street, provide around 40 minutes of playtime, and conclude with taking down the leader of the Rikers, James Dragov. The player begins the mission at the main external gate of the Riker defences. This is a tough opening encounter and reinforces the fact we're attacking a well-defended location. The second exterior section is tight, and the Rikers are using an armoured vehicle to launch grenades at the player, forcing them to reposition.
Shell the gate. Use the APC. Do not let them raid the stockpile.
The next location is an opulent lobby of a Wall Street investment firm. We chose this setting to afford us the chance to show the extreme wealth and glamour of Wall Street, corrupted and trashed by the Rikers. Once again, the enemy has the high ground, and the player must fight an uphill battle. I spawn archetypes that can deploy mobile turret emplacements here, providing a difficult challenge to overcome. For the next encounter, the player must balance dealing with enemies whilst also securing stockpile crates. I designed the room to be quite open to add a risk element to approaching and securing a stockpile crate. The race to secure crates forces the player to be mobile and react to Riker movements. I tried to add mechanics that would encourage player movement across the mission. In some Division content, the best strategy was often to camp at the entrance doorway, and I wanted to avoid this. If the Rikers get all of the crates, the objective will fail. The crates are positioned to break the room into an enemy half and friendly half. The positions of the stockpile crates are also randomised to increase replayability. With this beat completed, the momentum is starting to shift in the player's favour. They have secured the stockpile and taken down Duchess, one of Dragov's lieutenants. The layout of the next encounter aims to build a feeling of power for the player as the odds start to turn in their favour. For the first time, I give the players the high ground as they fight down a spiralling ramp. Combat down the ramp is dynamic, with constantly evolving cover lines and shooting vectors. The cover is sparse in this encounter, as I wanted traversal along the ramp to be unhindered by obstacles, and the barrier running along the ramp provides the majority of cover. However, I do include 2 solid lines of cover on the ramp, which will require vaulting to pass. I did this to break the ramp into combat sections and create decision points where the player and AI decide whether they feel safe to vault into the next section. A large bull and bear statue is at the centre of the space to help players orient themselves, as well as providing breaks in line of sight. When playing in a group, I spawn enemies both behind and in front of the players. Spawning enemies behind the players is something we're cautious of, as it can sometimes feel unfair. I made sure to include a comms warning and an audible elevator sound to signal the arrival of the enemies. With Rikers on both sides, the player is in an interesting scenario where they must defend from their flanks to avoid getting pincered. The fighting continues down the ramp until the player reaches the ground floor. The APC is a key encounter within the mission and aims to show that the Rikers are formidable and far from defeated. Upon approaching the exit, the APC sprays a car outside, hitting some explosive tanks. This was done to build anticipation and gives players a warning that a big threat faces them when they exit. Heading outside, we're greeted by a large armoured vehicle fortifying the middle of the street. I placed a weak point on each of the 4 sides of the APC. The player can only do damage to the vehicle by shooting these weak points. This forces the player to move around the space to destroy the APC rather than camping in one spot. To facilitate movement, I created extensive flanking routes on either side of the street. The left is more sheltered from the APC, but tighter and more dangerous to encounter enemies in. The right side is more open, making fighting enemies safer, but is very exposed to the APC fire and grenades. Once all of the weak points have been destroyed, the APC will explode into flames. The player is presented with a fairly typical encounter space, a mid-sized rectangular room with high ground and flanking routes on the right. I tuned the combat to be forgiving here to encourage players to push forwards into the room. After the initial enemies are defeated, 3 walls are breached in quick succession.
Blow this shit! Let's fuck them up!
The player will need to react and reposition, as they're now fighting in a space that is twice the size with front lines that have been rotated by 90 degrees. In 2 to 4 player groups I spawned 3 heavy archetypes to further increase the pressure. Fighting through the building, the player gets another surprise when they head upstairs, a low-key and very subtle Riker's intro. Once the area is secured, it's time to head back outside, where we get a great view of our target destination, the New York Financial Exchange. This encounter space consists of a U-shaped scaffolding arrangement. I added a 1 meter elevation to the opposing side to give the enemies an advantage. The fight has a fluid feel to it as the player moves around the U-shape, giving great views of the Financial Exchange facade as a bonus. We created a shootable window washing platform that will drop down when both weak points are hit. It was important to me that this wasn't just a hold button to interact moment, as figuring out and shooting to progress feels much more satisfying. Climbing into the Financial Exchange window, the player finds themselves tantalisingly close to reaching their target, James Dragoff. This non-combat area gives players a chance to gather themselves and prepare for the upcoming boss fight. I felt it was important to have a downbeat before the boss, as the mission is very combat heavy up until this point. A rallying speech by Dragoff plays as we move through the space to build anticipation.
We take this place and throw these rich bastards out of Wall Street for nothing? Then show the division that they can't touch us. Show me what you're made of.
Heading through a side room finally brings us to our target destination, the Financial Exchange trading floor. The side room itself exists purely to facilitate framing. I wanted to bring the player in at the best angle, which meant routing them to the back corner of the room. A letterbox-shaped door frames the trading floor. As the player enters the trading floor, the full height and scale is revealed. I did a lot of research into the real location and wanted to capture the busy, chaotic and noisy feeling of being on the trading floor, whilst remaining different enough as to avoid any legal issues. The trading floor is dominated by large kiosks housing many computers and monitors, so I started with these. I adapted them to work with our metrics and adjusted the layout configuration to provide interesting gameplay opportunities. We increased the footprint of the kiosks and made large openings on each side of them, allowing players to easily take cover and move inside of them. We draped tarp overhead in some areas to increase the feeling of claustrophobia, and all combat is kept to a single elevation level, as having to keep track of enemies on balconies, for example, would be too much for the player in this intentionally noisy and chaotic space. I send out a fairly easy wave of Rikers as the player enters. This gives them time to acclimatise to the space and learn the layout. Weaving and vaulting around the kiosks is fun and a great way to flank enemies, something which will be important in the upcoming boss fight. It's now time for the moment we've been building to throughout the mission, the showdown with James Dragoff. The lights will immediately cut to pitch black. I wanted the players to feel helpless and scared in this moment to accentuate the impact of Dragoff's entrance. Shortly afterwards, Dragoff's voice is beamed into the room, punctuated by smoke and flash grenades flying onto the trading floor. These detonate and blind the player. The blind serves several purposes, masking the spawn of the boss, amplifying a feeling of helplessness for the player, and hiding a lighting state change. The lighting state of the room switches to a threatening red to reflect the danger the player is now in. Dragoff and his 2 bodyguards, Ron and Knuckles, are now on the trading floor bearing down on the player. They each have a large riot shield and will move around in formation to protect each other. Fighting heavily armoured enemies in formation is something new to the Division, and I've been very pleased with the player reactions when they encounter Dragov, Ron and Knuckles for the first time. The fight is all about being mobile. Dragov will periodically fire a sticky bomb at the player. If this lands on them, they must get out of the area it hits very quickly. On its own, not too bad, but the player must also deal with enemy spawns from random corners of the encounter space. I placed powered off turrets in 3 corners of the trading floor. I didn't include a turret on the bottom left, as this is where the player enters the space. On a cycling timer, I spawn enemies at one of the 3 turret locations. I signal this to the player with flickering blue lights. The lights will power on at full brightness when the spawns are triggered. The same happens when the turret is about to deactivate. If the player dispatches the spawned enemies quick enough, they can use the mounted turret against Dragov and his bodyguards to shred their armour. The cycle of managing the boss, Ron, Knuckles, and periodic spawns repeats until Dragov and his bodyguards have been defeated. This marks the end of the mission, and the players can collect some well-deserved loot. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or would like to see more of my work, please visit my website. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching.